So our speaker today is Judith Ragir. Judith is the co-founder of the Water Zen Center in St. Paul, Minnesota, and has been practicing the integration of Zen Buddhism and the 12 steps for over 47 years. And Judith has very kindly agreed to do this wonderful workshop series with us, all about integrating how she has used the 12 steps and Buddhism as the foundation of her recovery during that time. And we're doing one step a month on the fourth Monday of each month. And this month we are on step 4. So Judith, it's great to see you. And I really appreciate, and we all really appreciate you doing this. So I'll now turn it over to you. Thank you, Judith.
Hi, everybody. Very nice to see you all. As I said in the little social before the meeting, how important this particular series is to me, because it's for the first time I'm using my charts and really trying to show how the 12 steps fit into the Buddhist theology. So it's rare when I get a chance to do that. You know, when I do regular 12-step talks, I don't mention Buddhism. And so this is an exciting opportunity for me. So let me read the 4th step. Made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. So this is the beginning of the self-examination portion of the steps. And I really, really think this is important, and I think it's a gift. A real gift of the 12 steps is steps 4 through 9. And I say it's a gift because in other religions, though it's there, you can find it, like confession in Catholicism and atonement in Buddhism and once a month atonement in the full moon ceremony, particularly in Zen. You can find it, and the precepts, which we're going to work on today, but it's actually not emphasized. And I think the reason that the 12th step, that the founders emphasized this, is because, excuse me for saying this, if you end up an alcoholic, a drug addict, a sex abuser, a compulsive eater, if you end up in a 12-step program, it probably means there's a lot that has to change in your life. You know, we're like, in my case, I was coming in the bottom of the barrel, and there were so many misunderstandings in my mind. There was so much shame. There was so many ideas that produced negative consequences for me, that the emphasis on self-examination and changing our patterning, our habituated patterns, that's what I call them a lot, is really, really important. And what I found, and I'm just speaking for Buddhism now, and I'm pretty much just speaking for Zen, and I'm pretty much just speaking from my own experience. My Zen experiences, they didn't do a good job on how do you actually change your habit patterns. In fact, a lot of it is bypassing our psychological problems, where they just say, just sit, or just be silent, or, Katagiri Roshi, my original teacher, he was a Japanese man. He didn't understand America. I'm very, very grateful to him for bringing all this information over. But he was not psychological at all, and he didn't want talking. Like this was in the 80s, I guess. He died in 1990. So in the 80s, we said, well, let's have small group discussions. And he said, no, I don't want talking. So I really think those of us who are doing 12-step in Buddhism together are very, very lucky, because what Buddhism doesn't emphasize, 12 steps does, and what 12-step doesn't do, which I'm going to say is going really, really deep into spirituality, or deep into meditation or conscious contact with God, which Buddhism does really well. So we're putting the two together, and that's very, very fortuitous. Is that the right word? Lucky, and a very strong foundation. So I am going to start today talking about when in the beginning, I kept saying, where is self-examination, psychological and habit pattern self-examination in Buddhism? And for quite a while, I kind of couldn't find it. And then I started to see where self-examination and habituated patterns start to show. And I learned it quite a bit from Tibetan Buddhism, not from Zen. In Tibetan Buddhism, they have, because they're developmental, and there's a certain stage in your development where you work on your karmic patterning. And through them, and I'm going to show you what I learned from the Tibetans, I really began to see how particularly steps 4 and step 6 fit together. 4 is the awareness of our patterns, and 6 is the willingness to change them. So today's talk is quite about 4 and 6, although when we get to 6, I'll repeat.
Do it again.
Appreciate. Okay. So that's the beginning, the most fundamental teaching in Buddhism. So I'm just going to repeat. This is a repeat for those of you who've been here before. The Buddhist practice has 3 bases. And it's like a 3-legged stool. This is my emphasis. If one of these pillars, the legs, if one of these legs of the 3-legged stool is underdeveloped, then the stool wobbles. So for me, and this is what I consider 21st century Buddhism teaching, is these 3 bases have to be balanced to have a really strong spiritual life. And I think 20th century Buddhism, convert Buddhism, overemphasized samadhi, or concentration or meditation. I did thousands of hours of retreats, and they underemphasized ethics and behavior, which is where 4 through 9 really, what we're going to be studying in the next weeks is the ethics and behavior stool. So that's why I think this is particularly important, and why I say we're lucky that we're bringing together 12 steps in Buddhism, because 12 steps does a beautiful job, steps 4 through 9, on this base. And Buddhism, I would say so. Okay, now we're going to open up the 3 bases. The 3 bases are the foundation of the Eightfold Path, which is really the path to liberating yourself. And in 12 steps, we call that freeing ourselves from the bondage of self, being free from the bondage of self. And that really overlaps with Buddhism, of course. So how do we free ourselves from the bondage of self? And here are the bases: prajna, or wisdom; samadhi, unification of the mind, or sometimes called concentration; and sila, which is ethics or behavior. So those are the 3 bases. Now, the Eightfold Path branches out from the three bases. Wisdom has wise view and wise intention. And we worked quite a bit with wise intention on the third step last time. Samadhi has wise mindfulness or heartfulness. 21st century is including the heart, and wise concentration. And we'll work on these more in step 11. I put wise effort in the center. Of course, it usually is under samadhi for those of you who want a traditional view, but I think that wise effort, embodiment, wise amount, all of these things are very important to all of the bases. So that's why I moved it in the center. Oops. Sorry. And the one we're going to work on today and for the next few times is the basis of ethics, which has wise speech, wise behavior, and wise finances. I changed that. Traditionally it's livelihood, but I think wise finances is broader and better for the Western world, where we're always dealing with how do we make our money? How do we spend our money? What's the good use of money? How much money do we need? All those questions I would put under wise finances. And all three of these are given more shape, more detail in what they call the Buddhist precepts. Now, I'm going to be giving you the Zen Buddhist precepts, and there are different versions of them. Thich Nhat Hanh has 5 precepts for lay people, but I'm going to give you the precepts that I was given and that I give to my students. The Theravadan, the Southeast Asian Buddhists, have long lists of precepts, and their priests abide by, I don't know, I think they're 350 for men, and they're more for women, which we all know as 21st century brains don't want there to be a difference between men's practice and women's practice. But anyway, this is an ancient religion, and those are the kind of reform we need to make in the 21st century. So let's spend a little time with the precepts, because the precepts are the basis in Buddhism for self-examination. And I also say that the precepts are, if you were a Buddha, and we're all capable of being Buddhas. Anyway, that's in Mahayana Buddhism. There is a true and full Buddha inside of us all. And if we were to have conscious contact, if we really start to feel the Buddha nature within ourselves, then the precepts are actually how does a Buddha act in this world? And this is how a Buddha would act. And I want to say something about we have all the capacity to be Buddha. I think it was Erik Erikson, it was 20th century psychologist. He used the word becoming the best person you can be, the most intelligent, the most moral person that you can be. And I think that's a good languaging for 12th step, and also for Buddhism. How to become a Buddha is you become the best, most intelligent, most wise discrimination person, and you show it through your behavior, your psychology, and your acts of love. Okay, so we did the 3 pure precepts last time, but I wanted to repeat them. These are the most essential, most basic: to do good, don't do harm, and to free yourself and others. That's my translation of them. It's easy. And I added this bottom one. This is a famous aphorism in Buddhism. And I added it because my feeling about the 4th step Now, after doing many, many, many 4-steps, you can imagine over a lifetime of 12-step, you do lots of 4-steps. Now I think, and I wrote a book, I just wrote, well, I'm writing another book, but the book that's published, Untangling Karma, that book is has a lot of 4-step self-awareness, trying to be aware of what I do and what are the consequences of my actions. And I joke a little, like it was a scan of all the hatred that's left in me. And I'm using hatred in a very broad way, like resentments and anger and selfish perspective. These are all part of what I would call not accepting life on life's terms and not having an open heart, peaceful heart, and accepting heart. Acceptance is the answer to all of our problems, is a famous 12-step saying. So this saying, hatred never ceases by hatred, but by love alone is healed. This is the noble and ancient law of cause and effect. So now my intention in my spiritual life, in my 12-step life, is to be loving, to learn how to do that, because I came from a family where I didn't learn how to love. I learned how to hate, be critical, be mean, be selfish, a lot of negative things I learned from my family of origin. And in particularly, I learned how to hate myself. So a lot of my 12-step life has been trying to turn that around. To learn what it means to love, to be gentle, to be kind, or what in God's name is unconditional love, because my love was always based on what I was getting out of the situation. So for me, even now, I'm in my 70s now, and still that's my primary goal, is to try and learn about unconditional love. And it says for sure, you're not going to heal if you're hating. That's not the way to find recovery or healing. You do it through uncovering your heart and what is love and how can you love yourself? How can you find the Buddha within? Katagiri Roshi used to say, you have to find the place within yourself which is beyond criticism. That's beautiful. I never could do it because I was so filled with criticism and self-judgment and judgment of others. But if you can find inside yourself the place where you're beyond criticism, that is conscious contact with unconditional love. And the last thing I want to say about this chart is cause and effect, because I think that's really my understanding of 4 and 8, I could say. Well, all the 4 through 9 and step 10 are about our deep understanding of our actions have consequences. And our actions are often caused by things in the past. So we have to clear up the past, understand our past. We have to change our behavior so that we're not causing consequences in the future that are contracted, bring us down, produce suffering for ourselves and others. So this understanding of karma is really important to step 4 in Buddhism. There were things in my past that caused my habit patterns. And I spent a lot of time on, actually, in Buddhism, they say, don't spend time on the story, just feel your body in the present moment. And through 12th step, I found that to not be true, that I had to go into the story to really understand, to become aware of how I got here, because I wanted to love myself. And when I understand that a lot of my habit patterns was because I had a difficult childhood, because I had sexual abuse in my childhood, because I'm a Jew and I was raised right after the war. All of these things produced the conditions in which I started to make a self. And how do I survive? These are all survival mechanisms. And the more I understood my past, the more I could forgive myself. Oh, I did that to survive. Good for me. I survived. But now those don't work anymore. And steps 4, 5, 6, and 7, and 8, and 9 are about how do we change those patterns. Okay, let's go on. These are called the 10 grave precepts in Zen. So this is kind of intellectual or conceptual, but if you want to take a moral inventory of yourself using Buddhist understanding, you could work with the precepts. And there's a lot to study here. Like, what does it mean not to kill? Because we can't live without killing. We kill, even if you're a vegan, you kill plants in order to live. And within our body, we have all these organisms. We don't even know they're there, but they're living and killing and doing all sorts of things inside. Do not kill. Do I kill? I'm very involved with my sons right now. Do I kill my sons when I overmother them, when I smother them? So there's a very broad understanding of what does it mean to kill the energy of life? Am I killing myself by self-hatred? So each one of these has a huge application and implication. And I have done a lot. I've studied one a month, one a year. We go over these, in a Buddhist center, maybe every 4 years, you go over these very in detail. But it is a way that you could do a Buddhist inventory. Is it important for me to read them all? Maybe I'll just read them. I mean, I've given lectures and classes on each one of these, so I can't go into detail. But so 1, respect life, do not kill. 2, be giving, do not steal. 3, honor the body, do not misuse sexuality. 4, manifest the truth, do not lie. 5, proceed clearly, do not intoxicate the mind. 6, see the perfection, do not speak of others' error and faults. 7, realize self and others as one. Do not elevate the self and blame others. 8, give generously. Do not be withholding or stingy. 9, actualize harmony. Do not indulge in anger. 10, experience the intimacy of things. Do not defile Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. So, of course, do not intoxicate the mind is a big one for us. And that's through any patterning, even watching too much TV or reading too many mystery novels or, eating too much sugar. All of these things are a way for us to keep an unclear mind. So that one is very important to step 1 in many ways. But all the others relate, I think, to what we do in a step 4. Let's go on. Here are the hindrances in Buddhism. And what I call the hindrances, these are obstacles to not having a clear mind, to not having an open heart, to not being able to accept what's exactly happening in this moment, to not becoming my best self. And I threw these in because this is another way that you could think about how to do a Buddhist step 4. One is our attachment, clinging to pleasant sensations or being driven by sensual desire, what makes us feel good, and just clinging to that. Or sometimes I think my whole life is based on what makes me happy, is based on sensual desire. The second one is having aversion or hating unpleasant sensations. This would include anger. So greed would be first, anger would be second. Greed, anger, and delusion are the 3 things that cause our misinformation about how to live. So the second has a lot to do about our resentments, our anger, and our aversion to things. The third one is sometimes they call it sloth and torpor. I think that was torpor. That was the original translation, but for me, it's having too little energy. Couch potato, not being procrastination, I think would be in this category. And that's a lot of the reasons why people don't do a 4th step, is they just feel like they can't get it up to face what you have to face. 4 would be restlessness, anxiety, having too much energy. I think a lot of my addiction was because of my anxiety. So I work on this a lot, how to ground myself in the day over and over and over, how to let go of my anxiety, trust the universe, and ground in the moment. And the last one is doubt or skepticism. I think this is very much in our world of, even doubting that the steps will work, is that. So let me just say, this doesn't have to do with the slide. What I started out with my 4th step when I was 25 or 26 years old, and I did a chronological inventory. What happened to me? It was very, very long. I did it alone, which I really want to suggest is not a good idea. Don't do your inventory by yourself. That's not part of the program. The program offers you sponsor and meetings, and the 5th step is about getting help. So don't do what I did, which I took 6 months to write this chronological inventory. I bawled my eyes out because it was all about my suffering as a child. I didn't ask for help, and it was terrible. I was able to keep sober. I don't know how I did that, but it was really, really hard. And then finally, I did a 6th step, and there was so much relief in telling someone, in realizing they didn't hate me because of the things I had done. It's very, very important. So I tell people now, just do a little 4th step and do a 5th step on it, turn it over, give it to someone, come back, go back and forth. Don't do it alone is one of my big things. Also, I believe in professional help, and it says we can do it from the big books. So I think a lot of my 4th step inventory was using psychotherapy, that I really learned a lot about myself. I could share these terrible things that I was keeping inside of me through professional help. Not everybody has to do that, of course. I'm just telling you my experience, strength, and hope is that I did use quite a bit of professional help to do a very thorough 4th step. There was something else I wanted to say about that. There are these workshops. I don't know if you have them, but in Minnesota, there are these workshops where you do 4 and 5 with a group of, 30 to 80 people, do it all at the same time. I recommend that. When you go to treatment, they sometimes do inventory work as a group, or you can get a lot of help, and that's a good way of doing it. The big book, of course, has ways of doing inventory. They're very popular where I'm from. And I have done a lot of inventories on specific topics, like my parenting. I might have done an inventory on it, or sexuality. I've done a lot. I didn't even tell anyone that I was sexual abused until I got into program. And that's a very sad thing to say, 25-year-old, hiding and having all these secrets. And these secrets are often very fundamental in the reason why we have chosen to be addicts. So these secrets have got to get cleared out. And I'll just say something funny. I wrote this book. It's a lot about my history, my conditioning, about being Jewish, being an addict. I really was quite thorough in this book. And then I had to go on a book tour. So then I had to do a public 6-step. That's what my sponsor called it. She said, "Oh, Judith, you're the only one I know who's written a book, and now you have to do it in public." But I would like to tell you that I really felt freedom after my book tour. I felt like I'm not hiding anything. I've digested the pain of my past, and I'm free to live as best I can now without, what do they say, not closing the door on your past, but having completely digested it, so that it's not, I can talk about it now. I don't have to cry about it. I don't have to hate my parents. I don't have to hate being Jewish. I'm free. So that's what a really good inventory can do. Okay, now I'd like to, how am I doing time-wise? I'm okay. So at one point in when I was doing these 12-step in Buddhism, not classes, but meetings and talks, I thought, where are the amends? Besides, in the morning service, we do one thing. I make amends for my ancient twisted karma. But it wasn't practical. It wasn't like going in there and really doing something. So I started to study Buddhism. And when I studied with Pema Chodron, I didn't put it in because I was saving it for step 6. I started to listen to Pema Chodron, and she's very famous. You can find lots of books and lots of stuff from her, but she was very, very good at how do you work with your contractive shame? How do you change your patterning? And I studied with another Tibetan teacher on how to change your karma. And he called it interrupting your habit patterns. You have to interrupt your pattern. First of all, you have to be aware of your pattern. That's 4th step. Then you have to be willing to interrupt it. That's the 6th step. And then you have to keep doing it over and over. So here are the 5 R's. I've used this so much, and I really think this is step 4, 5, 6, and 7, and some 8 and 9. So let's start. First is recognition, the first R, awareness of the pattern. And this is what you get in the 4th step. You cannot change a pattern unless you know it's there. You have to know what the pattern is. The second step is regret. You have to have the right amount of regret, because the pain of the regret, the pain that you've caused other people suffering, that pain has to be strong enough to inspire you, to give you the energy to want to interrupt your pattern, or the energy to change. When I don't feel like I have to change or I want to change, all I have to do is go to the pain that this pattern has caused me or other people. So the pain of it is the energy can get converted into the energy to change the pattern. Now, what did I write? Fresh start, positive sadness, piercing the heart, which allows for motivation to change. But I will say one thing, it's got to be the wise amount or the right amount of regret, or because of my personality, I could circle around all this shame and regret and how bad a person I was for months. And that's not good. That's not good for self-love. You have to feel it enough to get the energy to want to change. And then you have to let it go and forgive yourself. So this regret is a little bit tricky. It's about what is the necessary amount before I can move on. So the third is reliance, and I think that's steps 2 and 3 in our languaging, which is I have to trust that there is hope that I can recover. I can be restored to sanity. It's trust, it's taking refuge in your spiritual life, taking refuge in Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, if you're a Buddhist, and really believing that you're being held by and trusting something greater than yourself. So I always thought that this was the second and the third step, turning things over, believing in recovery, and knowing that there is a flow to my life. And if I get in that flow, I think I can be healed. The fourth one is remedial action, and I am very involved. I love this one. This really opened my eyes. And I think this has a lot to do with step 6, becoming willing to change. It says, let God change. But I think in this whole change business, there's effort, which is step 6, and effortlessness or grace, which is step 7. So in becoming willing, there are certain things that you can do to fertilize the soil of change in your life. And this one is what I call interrupting my habit pattern. So, okay, I'll just take one. Forgive me, but I'm going to take one from what I'm currently working on. So I am trying to respect my son's need for space and autonomy, and not to have a smothering mother, a mother giving constant advice and going in his privacy where he doesn't want me. So that's the pattern. You could call it the Jewish mother pattern. There are beautiful things about the Jewish mother pattern. It's warm, it's caring and loving. So I want to keep the good part, but this part that's smothering, I want to interrupt. So first of all, I have to notice with mindfulness. This is where a strong mindfulness practice is very helpful. I have to notice when I'm entering the pattern. Katagiri Roshi used to call that hearing the barking dogs. So when you're walking down the street, The dogs a block away from you, in front of you, smell you or hear you, and they start barking. You can't even see them yet, but they're barking and you can hear that they're barking. So when your pattern starts, there's usually some kind of barking, and it's very helpful to know what the barking is. For example, with my food addiction, I do have a barking, which is, I hear in my mind, I want to eat that, and it doesn't matter if I do. I won't tell anybody. No one will know. So man, when I hear that sentence go through my head, that is a barking dog. That means, okay, I'm entering the pattern, and can I interrupt it? And interrupting the pattern needs to start at the beginning, because if I'm already eating whatever I wanted, I can't stop. It's kind of like don't take the first bite or the first drink. Once you're involved in your addiction, it's very, very hard to stop it, as we all know. But at the very beginning, when you know you're entering your pattern that produces negative action, that is when you can interrupt it. And the way you interrupt it is by having a spiritual practice that you do at that moment, or something you've prepared. And often this is helpful to do with a sponsor or a friend. When I am entering the pattern, what could I do instead? Anything instead. For example, these are stupid examples, but when I'm ready to open the refrigerator door, I could lie on the floor instead. That produces a pause, that gives me time to breathe, that gives me time to say, is there anything that would be more nurturing to do than your pattern? Or let's see, well, what I'm doing with my sons to interrupt the smothering pattern is when I have the impulse to call them, to give them advice, to go into their private life, I say to myself an affirmation-like phrase, something like, I am respecting their need for space, and that's the gift of love I'm giving them. The gift of love I'm giving them is space. And when I say that, sometimes I can interrupt the pattern. Then I don't text, I don't call, I don't stop by uninvited, I don't give them advice. Do you see? That's a pre-made. I have already thought about how I'm going to interrupt the pattern. And when I know that the pattern has arisen, I do what I pre-decided to do. The other thing, don't feed the problem with your thoughts. Do anything differently. And the last one is resolve. And this is part we talked about last time about having a vow. But mostly it means you have to do step 4. You have to do this whole thing over and over and over and over. You have to repeat and repeat and repeat. You have to interrupt, interrupt, and interrupt. And this is, oh, I wish I had put it down, is a karmic thing. The more you run the pattern, the stronger it gets. The less you run the pattern, the more you interrupt the pattern, the smaller the pattern gets, the less intensity the pattern gets. And we know this from some of us who have been sober a long time. The pattern is very, I don't think about getting a drink anymore. I think about other things, but I've repeated that interruption so many times that that karmic pattern is reduced. And they talk about this in the neurosciences, that you can change your neurological patterning. And the way you do that is by interrupting the old pattern and practicing a new pattern over and over and over. And Buddhism says that your karma can get burnt out. And part of the way you burn out your karma is by sitting with the pain of your karma and not avoiding it. So that's partly, I think, partly this too, that I've learned how to sit in pain and not fix it or do something addictive to lessen my ability to sit in the pain of life. And I can see what caused that pain, the suffering, and then I can work on choosing a different way. This is one of my new teachers, Philip Moffitt, often talks about choice as freedom. The more choice we have to choose wholesome actions that are going to produce positive consequences, rather than choosing our old patterns that produce the same goddamn thing over and over, the more choice we have, the more we're free. To me, that's really beautiful. And it lies somewhere in step 6, becoming willing to have my patterns changed. And step 7 is what happens when your karma has been burnt out by your attention, by your care to your history, by really taking care of your psychology. The more you do that, the karma gets burnt out. And then things you thought you could never change, they just kind of change. It's spiritual, what happens right there. It's not willpower. Even though I'm talking a lot about choice, I think choice is something, a discernment we do in the present moment over and over and over. That's practice. But the results of our practice are not about our willpower. We don't control that. We receive it. One of the things I say in Buddhism is we turn the Dharma wheel by our practice over and over, interrupting my patterns. And then the Dharma turns us. Then we receive the Dharma, the results, through grace, the lifting of our defects of character, all of a sudden I'm doing it differently with my sons. Sometimes it's not as hard to give them space as it used to be. That is the grace coming back to me. Do I have one? I do have a little more time, I think. So I'm going to do rain, this is really, really cool. 2, this is another patterning for how do I deal with emotional difficulties or habit patterns that are producing pain. And this comes out of the Vipassana tradition. And I can't remember who made it really famous, but it's pretty famous. You just have to Google Buddhism and rain, and you'll get there's many, many lectures on this. It's very popular right now. You might even know it. So the first is recognize. So that's step 4 right there. You have to know what you're feeling. You have to know what the pattern is. You have to know if you're being an asshole or not. You have to recognize what is happening. The second is kind of steps 2 and 3. You just allow the moment to be exactly as it is. You allow the pain, or you allow the greediness, or you allow thousands of years of Jewish mother patterning. I just say, yes, here it is. It's present in me, and I can accept it. And this gives it so much more space or gentleness, or even loving kindness to the karma that is really not your fault. You know, it's not, it was a survival mechanism. You know, even Jewish mothers, that came out of oppression. It's a survival mechanism, so you can be kind to it and you can allow yourself to feel what you're feeling. The third is to investigate. I think they mean, in Buddhism, often they mean, how does it feel in your body? What emotions are attached to it? I also think it's a fourth step. You investigate, how did this happen? What's happening to me? What are the positive elements I could do? You give it time. And the last N of rain, the one that I like the most, is nurture. Then after you've done all this, my intention is to love myself through self-compassion, through gentleness, through acceptance of how my life is appearing at this moment, with the confidence that if I practice, if I work the steps, my life will and can change. I just put this down here because in the original reign, the fourth step was non-identification, which means that you don't centralize it around a self. Like you don't identify with your greed, or you don't identify with your anger. And because you just think of it as an emotion or a pattern that's arising in the moment, then it's much easier to change than when the way they say it in 12 step is, I am not a greedy person. At the moment, greed is arising. Do you see the difference in that? You don't make yourself a bad person. You just notice, oh, I'm doing a habit pattern that's not going to produce a good result. So I realized this was more than step 4, but it's the way I think about 4 through 9 now. And we'll be going over these again as we get to step 6. I'll go over them and add to the idea of changing karmic patterning.
Wonderful. Thank you, Judith.